welcome everyone, or should I say welcome back, to the DOA podcast with your host, Jeff Ward. Of course, this DOA stands for Decisions, Opinions, and Analysis, and I do apologize for my rather lengthy break, but I had to apply the finishing touches to my upcoming book, Diary of a Curmudgeon, and those edits and additions took a lot longer than I thought they would. But I am back, and I plan on hitting the podcast beat on a far more regular basis. All that said, there does seem to be a value to taking that break because my plan has been to cover the August 12th Shadwick King retrial, murder retrial, guilty verdict. And now we can do more than that because there haven't been a lot of developments, but there's been two fairly fascinating possibilities that are going to add a lot of insight and flavor to this ongoing story. But first things first, let's cover Judge John Barsanti's ruling. John came out at 1:35. The verdict was to be read at 1:30. He read two very short paragraphs from his ruling, declared Mr. King guilty, and adjourned the courtroom. I mean, it was downright anticlimactic after a nearly 3-week trial. Of course, the judge admonished the folks in the room to not give in to any emotional outburst at the reading of the verdict. And I thought there would be maybe a minor gasp, a hugging of a family member, sighs of relief. There was absolutely nothing. Both families were completely stoic as they filed out of the courtroom. And the only thing I heard was one of Miss Kathleen King's, Shadwick King's wife. You know, we've got Kathleen Zellner and Kathleen King. I heard one of Kathleen King's relatives say justice was finally served. But I had to be right next to them to hear it, and that was about it. I'm thinking after 2 long trials, it was a relief for everyone for it to be over. John Barsanti issued an 11-page ruling, briefly outlining his reasoning for why he found Mr. King guilty. Though this wasn't part of that process, Judge Barsanti did note that Kathleen Zellner's argument that had everyone done the right thing when they found Miss King at the railroad tracks, she could have been resuscitated. But John pointed out that doesn't matter. You can't say, well, if everybody else did the right thing, Mr. King, regardless of whether he assaulted his wife or not, is off the hook because it no longer matters. She's still alive. But that's not the way the law works. The law states that, even in a circumstantial case, if the jury or judge finds that you contributed to her injuries, that's it. It's over. Guilty. And I still can't begin to fathom what the defense team was trying to accomplish with this line of argument. It would be one thing if Zellner put the Geneva police on trial because they made a number of silly mistakes. But we're talking a bench trial in front of a veteran judge who consistently gets rated 100 out of 100 on legal knowledge. But nevertheless, it was interesting that the judge noted that line of argument didn't matter. And I think that really aggravated the crap out of Ms. Zellner. We'll get to why I think that's the case in a little bit. Judge Barsanti's next contention was that Dr. Larry Bloom didn't author the report he signed outlining his testimony that Kathleen King died from sudden cardiac arrhythmia brought on by binge drinking. And I do think that's kind of a problem. Again, we've discussed this. Dr. Bloom worked on the first trial for free. He never let go of it during a 7-year interval between the trials. COVID took its time toll there. And then he did the second trial for free. So, when you're that invested in a potential verdict and you simply sign a report the defense wrote in their own words, I don't know, that kind of, in my mind, takes a big bite out of your credibility. And once you eliminate Dr. Bloom's testimony or relegate it to not credible, the defense's whole case collapses. Judge Barsanti noted that Shadwick King had the motive, though it wasn't necessary for the prosecution to prove there was a motive. He also indicated that Mr. King had the means and the opportunity to kill his wife as well. But the judge's main contention was the scene at the railroad tracks was clearly staged. And that's something that I've hammered home in previous podcasts on the subject. I mean, no woman, no veteran runner goes out with an underwire bra put on twisted, one running sock put on upside down, no underwear, and no phone band and no AirPods. Not only that, as we've also previously discussed, I saw the railroad track death scene pictures, and no human being could fall like that unless they were running down the tracks like the Tasmanian devil from the old Bugs Bunny cartoons. And the fact that her neck was perfectly draped over one of the rails was also another impossibility. And the judge went into that in depth in his short ruling. Lastly, Judge Barsanti found the defendant's testimony inconsistent and not credible. I wasn't there for the testimony, but Daily Herald reporter Sue Sarkowskis was, and she kind of filled me in on those courtroom days, and I would have to agree with Judge Barsanti in that regard too. And that pretty much sums up his ruling. If you want to read it for yourself, please avail yourself of thefirstward.net and search for the simple title, Guilty, and it's embedded in that post. Sue and I waited outside the courtroom for about a half hour after the verdict in hopes of talking to Ms. Zellner. But after, a half an hour, I had to leave. Sue stuck it out, and when it came down to it, Ms. Zellner refused to talk to her, making a beeline for the 48 Hours reporter instead. And that tells you an awful lot about Ms. Zellner's mindset. Post-trial motions were set for around 30 days after the trial. And again, post-trial motions they're a done deal. They don't do it for traffic tickets, but any time a defendant is found guilty in a criminal trial, they have 30 days to file a motion to reconsider the verdict. If they don't, they lose their right to appeal. What these motions to reconsider do is preserve any reversible error to eventually be submitted to the appellate courts in an appeal. And let me tell you, these motions are usually 8 or 9 pages. They just basically cover what the defense attorney thinks the judge did wrong, and perhaps the appellate court will take it up and order a new trial, vacate the trial. Vacate the verdict, among other possibilities. But in this case, Ms. Zellner came up with a 99-page motion, 88 of which was argument. And the vast irony there is, if she does eventually take this to the second district appellate court, if she does eventually take this to the second district appellate court, those briefs are limited to just 50 pages. So there's going to have to be some serious editing on her team's part before she could even begin to submit, that level of reversible error. Her major points included that the state failed to refute their the defense's binge drinking contention. And having sat there for as long as I did, the defense failed to prove that it was even a possibility. As Judge Millian of People's Court likes to say, all you got is your flapping gums, and that's all they had here. They had no medical evidence that Kathleen's capacity to drink did her in. And in fact, Greg Sams correctly noted, considering the number of times the defense referred to separate binge drinking incidents, why didn't she die during one of those? Zellner also noted that there was no evidence of a cleanup at the King household, but the prosecution used that very fact against the defense because there's, as we previously discussed, there's a picture of, one of her last days alive of Kathleen King standing in her bedroom doorway. There was a selfie, and aside from one piece of clothing on the floor, the bedroom's immaculate. Moving forward to the Geneva police taking pictures after Kathleen's death, and it looks like burglars rifled the room to get at valuables in dresser drawers. But the most hilarious part of Zellner's motion is over 9, single-spaced pages taking on virtually every objection that wasn't either granted or overruled in her favor. I mean, it really comes down to a screed against that scurrilous John Barsanti, who clearly shouldn't be a judge and doesn't know what he's doing. Again, those are her implied words, not mine. In general, John's a pretty good judge. And knowing that there's no way King is going to get a retrial this time, at least from Judge Barsanti, like I said, it just seems like it's Zellner's, a Kathleen Zellner form of temper tantrum. That she just wanted, she's just issuing this motion because she can't fathom that she lost the case. But as we've also been discussing, this case was lost when she decided to go for a bench trial. The whole resuscitation issue notwithstanding, that might have put some sort of doubt in a jury's mind. And no matter what the jury instructions might be, if you create a visceral reaction in a juror, and particularly a female juror, you can minimally get a hung jury. But that couldn't be the case here. She couldn't put the Geneva police on trial. They made a number of mistakes, not the least of which was giving the emergency vehicle the wrong directions to get there, not taking pictures in certain cases, and I could go on. And that, again, it would have played with the jury, but a veteran judge isn't going to buy those kinds of emotional heartstring tugs that some defense attorneys are famous for. Now, one of my favorite attorneys warned me that Ms. Zellner was going to do this. She was going to file, a rather lengthy post-trial motion, and but not even they thought it would be 100 pages long. And their theory all along was, look, judges don't have to give a written ruling. They can simply come out, say the state proved its case, Shadwick King is guilty, and that's it. And after Kathleen's printed diatribe, I think that would have been the better way to go. Just simply say guilty and walk away, and then she wouldn't know what to do. Judge Barsanti will rule on the motion to reconsider on October 5th, but just as the guilty verdict was assured in this case, there's no way he's going to turn back now. There's no way he's going to look at it and go, I was completely wrong. Let's give him a retrial, which means King's next step, and it is Shadwick King, not Zellner, who gets to make these determinations, will be to authorize an appeal to the second district. But that's not going to go anywhere either. Not with those justices who are as letter of the law as John Barsanti tends to be. But here's the truly fascinating thing. A number of attorneys and I have discussed the fact that there seems to have been no plea deal offered in this retrial. And remember, the prosecution had no clue Zellner was going to go for a bench trial. And she does have a reputation. They figured she'd impanel a jury and do all the kinds of things that reasonable defense attorneys do. Play to their emotions, try to get one juror to hold out because now now the jury's hung, and generally try to turn this case into a referendum on the efficacy of local law enforcement's efforts during a rare Kane County murder case. So these attorneys and I figured that somewhere along the line, King or Zellner should have gone to the prosecution, said, tell you what, I've already served 7 years. Let's settle on second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, something like that, and go with time served. And that would have made a lot of sense. King would be out. Justice will have prevailed. 7 years for a murder isn't a long time, but I wouldn't want to spend 7 years in jail. Then, just last week, a stellar source came to me and said that they have really good information that Sams and the prosecution made that very offer. They said that Sams went to Zellner and said, look, we'll go with involuntary manslaughter, we'll go with time served, and that'll be the end of it. And any defendant in his right mind should have leapt at the opportunity when they're looking at 23 more years in prison. But the defense turned him down. Again, I have no proof that offer was a reality, but it makes a lot of sense. And that makes the question, who turned it down? In the end, it's a defendant themselves that gets to make those decisions. But Shadwick King is not nearly the smartest guy on the planet. And Miss Zellner can be rather persuasive. You may have noticed she's an attorney, and a well-regarded one at that. So most of the folks I spoke with on, that possibility believed that Zellner talked King out of it and said, we're going to win this, let's go to trial. But I'm not sure, because having watched so much of the Geneva police interview tapes, I should say videos, tapes is kind of an old school word, you got the feeling as you watched Mr. King interact with law enforcement that he'd somehow convinced himself that he had not killed his wife. And I think that can happen. I think when, human beings do something that is unfathomable even to them, you can just bury that memory somewhere deep and, pave it over with your belief in your own innocence. Because I gotta think, if Mr. King could admit his guilt to himself, he would have leapt at the opportunity to get out of prison. Sure, you're a convicted killer, but he's likely to get the very same 30-year sentence. And with 7 years time served, like I said, that's 23 more years. I believe he's about in his mid-50s now, which is going to put him near 80 when and if he gets out. But regardless, if the offer was made, and I do believe it was, it's the only thing that makes any sense. And King didn't take it. He's a bigger fool than even I thought he was. So conclusions. And I've been saying this one all along. Kathleen Zellner was in way over her legend in her own mind head. Clearly, she and her team can write emotion, can write stellar appellate briefs. But she is not a trial attorney. She should have let one of the younger individuals from her team, and there was about 7 of them there, take over that task. But, it's hard to admit to yourself, I believe she's 65 years old, that you're not, the litigator perhaps you once were. And I still maintain that Shadwick King would have done a heck of a lot better with one of our amazing public defenders. And when I say our, I mean King County. But when an attorney of Zellner's caliber and reputation approaches you and says, look, you can have a public defender or you can have me at no cost, that would have to be awfully difficult to turn down. But just the same, I've maintained that Zellner sold out King for publicity. It may not have been conscious, but that's clearly exactly what happened. And it was never more evident than when Kathleen Zellner just brushed by Daily Herald reporter Sue Sarkowskis and immediately ran to the 48 Hours and Other news magazine, or whatever you call those things, reporters. The bottom line is this case, after 2 long trials, is over. Like I said, I'm sure Zellner will appeal it, but John Barsanti committed absolutely no reversible error serious enough to vacate the verdict or to have the appellate court send it back for a retrial. And when the 2nd District appellate court, turns Zellner down, I'm sure she'll go to the Illinois Supreme Court and their decision will be exactly the same. And so ends a very sad tale of Geneva, Illinois' apostrophe. Yes, I'm not mispronouncing my own state. Geneva, Illinois' first murder trial in almost 50 years. And there's just some things I just don't understand about this. I know human beings are a delicate and fragile proposition, but if Kathleen really was in love with this new guy, and she married a guy that was much older than she was, I think 14 years, just get a divorce. Shadwick even offered her one, and her response was, I don't want to divorce you. You're too well trained. But I can't imagine texting somebody 3,000 times in 2 weeks. I don't think I've issued 3,000 texts this year. And as far as Mr. King goes, once he got a hold of those texts, the handwriting was on the wall. I know it's not easy to let go. I know this happened to him once before, but it's better to, end a declining marriage than it is to kill your wife and essentially spend the rest of your life in jail. But I think, they both got absurdly drunk. He flew into a rage, like I said, this has happened to him before, and assaulted and killed her. So now I believe there's 2 children, essentially without a father and certainly without a mother. 2 families are reasonably destroyed over this sad state of circumstances. I know justice brings some closure, but it's certainly not going to bring Kathleen back. And now, Shadwick's family has to watch him spend virtually the rest of his productive life in jail. Particularly having spent so many hours in family court, some to deal with issues in my neighborhood, which have thankfully been fixed, others to try to get rid of Judge John Dalton, which those efforts eventually paid off. It's sad to think that 2 people who once truly loved each other can, turn on their significant others and even, kill them at times. I know that, crimes of passion. I know it's not easy to let go of certain things, but geez, walking away, making better decisions, it would be a far better course of action than what happened here. So that'll bring an end to this episode of the DOA podcast. Again, DOA stands for Decisions, Opinions, and Analysis. I'm your host, Jeff Ward. This is likely the end of our coverage of the King case. I mean, it would have to take something extraordinary to change the trajectory of this case at this point. So this is where that story ends. Again, thank you so much for listening. I promise more podcasts in the near future. And as I consistently like to promise, let's continue the conversation.